There is no evidence that his client or the Trump campaign team in general colluded with Moscow. Let's listen now to what Kevin Downing had to say outside a federal courthouse in Washington just after his client pleaded not guilty.
Well, I think you all saw today that President Donald Trump was correct. There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. Mr. Manafort represented pro-European Union campaigns for the Ukrainians. Those activities ended in 2014, over 2 years before Mr. Manafort served in the Trump campaign.
Well, for more on what's been a very busy day in Washington, we can speak now to Eric Lisann, a legal analyst and a former US federal prosecutor. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. First of all, legally speaking, where do we go from here? What could be in store for these two men?
Well, this is really just the beginning of the formal legal process now that is beginning to take shape. And these are the opening salvos in terms of the formal charges. We saw the indictment, that is the formal unveiling of charges, which could be augmented, by the way, in the future, but right now against Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, and Paul Manafort's lieutenant, Rick Gates. Those charges outlined serious offenses against the government. They're merely accusations. We will have a trial unless some sort of an agreement is reached between the parties ahead of time. It would either be an agreement to plead guilty by Mr. Manafort and Mr. Gates in exchange perhaps for some concessions from the government, or it would be a trial. At trial, there would either be a finding by a jury of guilty or not guilty. If the finding was guilty, then the judge would impose a sentence which, given the very large amounts of money allegedly laundered in this case, something like $75 million in gross receipts coming in for work allegedly done for Russia or Russian-allied interests in Ukraine, the criminal sentence would be many, many years. It could even be well in excess of 10 years, depending on a lot of other things. That's without any parole. The most significant development, however, in terms of what wasn't known generally to the public before, was the plea agreement that was unveiled with a Trump campaign aide, Mr. Papadopoulos. That agreement shows that Mr. Papadopoulos has admitted to lying to agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, while they were investigating collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. He has now said he misled agents on that, and that, in fact, he was in very active discussions with people he understood to be high-level officials of the Russian government or to be connected to those people with the hopes of obtaining, quote-unquote, dirt on Hillary Clinton. So very, very important things that are developing here.
Mr. Lisann, in your view, is this all an isolated case or just the start of a massive domino effect?
Well, I think more the latter than the former. I mean, there's nothing isolated about these things. In the position of Mr. Manafort was a very significant one in the campaign. He was running the entire campaign for a period of a few crucial months right before Steve Bannon came in, and he was running all of the events at the Republican National Convention, in which, by the way, it must be remembered that several pro-Russian planks were inserted into the Republican Party platform. Whether that was coincidental or not remains to be seen, but it doesn't look like it could have been accounted for by pure coincidence. And now we're seeing that there's other people that were involved in the campaign that, in addition to the known contacts the campaign had with close Russian agents, there were official campaign operatives separate from the Trump family and separate from Mr. Manafort that were involved in these communications and that were passing this information along to the highest levels of the campaign. So we'll likely see much more about this in the coming weeks and months.
And just very briefly and finally, what does, in your view, all of this mean for Donald Trump?
It can spell nothing but trouble for him, and certainly that accounts for his almost increasingly desperate attempts to point out, rightly or wrongly, things that Hillary Clinton was involved with in the past, and to try to demonstrate, by way of excusing it, that there's some sort of equivalency here, which is a tactic he's employed throughout this last year. But this is a big cloud that's only getting darker, that is not going to go away, and whose tentacles are going to continue to reach into the uppermost levels of his administration, and will indeed put into grave question whether he can survive all 4 years when all is said and done.
Eric Lisann in Washington, D.C., thank you very much.